Data Voyagers.
We live in a time where data is everywhere, but wisdom is rare. A time where more data is available, but with all of this power, we are thinking better or just faster. The real challenge of information age isn't access to data, it's knowing how to think with data. Welcome to the Data Voyagers podcast, navigating the stories behind numbers. I'm your host, Igor Alcantara. Oi, pessoal. And I have here with me my friend, fellow Click ambassador, and co-host, Angelika Klidas. Hi, Angelika.
Hey Igor, well, thanks to be here. Hi, hoi even allemaal van Nederland. That's my language, Nederland, Dutch. So yeah, today we have something special right ahead. Igor?
Absolutely. As you said, we have a great episode prepared, but we're not alone. We have a very special guest with us, and would you mind introducing him to our listeners?
Yeah, well, with us today is my dear friend and co-writer of the book that he and I have written end of 2022, right? It was launched. Data literacy in practice, my dear friend Kevin Hanegan. So hi Kevin, welcome to our show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks to both of you. I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to talking about critical thinking and data literacy. Should be fun.
Yeah, think so too.
Yeah, very good. So we're talking about critical thinking, but before we begin our episode, just a quick reminder for our listeners. I'll ask you all to subscribe to the Data Voyagers podcast, wherever you get your podcast, so you don't miss any episode. Either Spotify, Apple Podcast, Overcast, any podcast app. While there, if you like what we do, please give us 5 stars. I was checking before we were recording; we're around like 65 stars on Spotify. Not bad, but we can do much better than that. And follow our page on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn, search for Data Voyagers, will find us. You can also visit our website, datavoyagers.net. We have an online store with pretty cool arts there. And supporting any way you can, like sharing, liking, commenting the things we do. And talking about support, let's hear a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of the Data Voyagers podcast is brought to you by IPC Global. At IPC Global, we're different. Our mission goes beyond delivering data projects. We drive real business outcomes. We help our clients grow revenue, streamline operations, and reduce costs by meeting them where they are and empowering them to achieve their objectives. What sets IPC Global apart is our commitment to keep customers for life. We earn that trust every day through humility, professionalism, integrity, loyalty, and a family first mindset. We're not just technical experts, we're business partners who listen deeply and are relentless about delivering value. When you work with IPC Global, you get a team fully invested in your long term success because you are part of their family. At IPC Global, we do business differently. All right, so let's start by defining what critical thinking is. Who wants to get started on that?
Well, of course, I did some research in our book on the various channels that we have available nowadays. And what I found on the internet, and maybe Kevin, you can give your opinion about that definition. Critical thinking is the intellectuality. Whoa, that's a difficult word again for a Dutchie. Disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. The analogy I use based off of that is like, imagine you're reading a textbook or you're reading the news. You understand the words and you can read the sentence, so you're describing information. It's what it's saying, but it's not telling you what it means to you. It's not telling you what inferences you draw from it. It's not telling you how to interpret. So if you read a good novel, the author doesn't just tell you everything. They leave like a story, like they leave breadcrumbs, and you go from there and you draw inferences and you increase your comprehension of what they're trying to do through their stories. That's critical thinking, is we're not just describing the data or the information. We're interpreting what does it mean in our situation, in our context, relative to the question we're trying to ask. So it's a higher order of thinking, as anyone can, not anyone, but many people can read a sentence, they can read a visualization. But critical thinking goes beyond that and says, okay, what does that actually mean for my situation? It goes deeper into that. And those are all the words you said in the definition, right? It requires you to analyze, interpret, understand. I think people can understand it better when we say it equated to reading a book. You can read the book, but do you understand what the author's trying to say? If you do, you have that comprehension. And if you don't, usually you think critically, you ask questions, you work on trying to interpret it. And to me, that's kind of what critical thinking is, with specifically with data, but in general, with anything.
Can I make an analogy in culinary? It might, and let me know if it makes sense or not. I think, like in that case, critical thinking is like difference between just following blindly a recipe and actually thinking about, oh, do I like this much of sweetness? Do I want to add this? And actually thinking how those ingredients like interact with one another to give you the flavor and nutrients you want. So I think that's kind of the analogy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you did some classes, right? And we did them together, presentations about critical thinking. We did one at C40, where we discussed questioning and critical thinking, and you gave some good examples. And actually, when I was preparing for a assessment that in one of my projects, I started wondering how I could point out to my to the students that I have in my class. To become critical, and I used your analogies and stuff for it. So yeah, it's an amazing example for me to use it as well in my classroom. So thank you again. So today I would like to go to some topics like the importance of critical thinking in a world full of data, but also what could be considered as a first step to going into that world. But also how data literacy contributes to a better decision making, and the role of questioning, because questioning and critical thinking are intertwined. So the role of questioning in discovering insights from data, and I know we have written down in the book, in both books, I think you have written, there is a framework how we can do so, but also the common pitfalls, of course, in interpreted data and how to avoid them, and the impact of AI in this case on critical thinking and data analysis, because the results from actually the results, I think you can compare them. It's the same, but at the end it's also very different, and we have different people that are using, for example, the result from generative AI. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic, I think. So the first question, starting the journey for somebody, in a business who feels overwhelmed with data, what would be the very first step that they could do to begin think more critically?
It's a very valid question. I see this a lot of time when I'm talking or training, and someone introduces me as data literacy, and you see half the room zone out, and they're like, "Oh, time out! I'm not a data person," because they think it's numbers and complicated and so forth. So I'll do a first to start the journey, but I'll do a mindset and a skill. So the first mindset I think everyone has to say is, data is not just numbers. It's not just statistics. It's not just algebra. That is complicated data, but data, think of it as information. You watch the news, it says the weather report, it's data. You're watching a court case and the jury is presented evidence, that's data. All of this stuff doesn't have to be numbers. And so we need to, as soon as we say we're intimidated by it, we tend to stop thinking critically because we think that it's more advanced than what we are. So that mind shift has to happen. But the word you said multiple times, which I think is the way everyone needs to start, is start asking questions. So we hear a lot of times people say like the 3 C's of data literacy, and one of them is curiosity, but I don't think people really understand why it's curiosity, because curiosity is asking questions. It's like any of us that have kids, we know it drives us crazy because they're curious, right? Because they don't have a long-term memory. So they say, why this, why that? And it goes insane, but they're curious. And then we stop doing that. So the best way to start being a critical thinker is to be curious. Why is this number this way? Why did this happen? What is the data really telling me? In what situation is the data maybe misleading? What problem am I really trying to solve? Does data actually help me solve that problem? Because if you don't do that, you might look at a visualization and it might say, oh my God, my sales are trending down. That's horrible. And then you just jump into, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to lay people off? Are we going to lower the price? When critical thinkers say, okay, in what situation could the sales be down, but it could be something unrelated to bad performance? Could it be seasonality? Could it be environmental? Could it be an issue with the supply chain? All of those things require you to be curious. So I guess summing up, I tell everyone, start the journey by trying to, I don't want to say remain curious, because a lot of us stopped being curious, but try to reignite your curiosity and just ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember we talked a lot about curiosity, about asking questions. And for me, the biggest example is this picture behind me on the ground. You can see it behind me. And it's my daughter, Jazz. She's 20. And my grandson, he was a little bit smaller on that picture, but he's 3.5 years old now. And he's in his why period.
Yeah.
And he asks a lot of questions. Why is this, Mama? And then he has the ability to keep on asking questions, and that's the fun part of it. But then you have to remain calm, think about the answers that you have to give. But at the end, sometimes I, as a grandmother, don't know the answer. But can you imagine what happens when he goes to school? And if he asks a lot of questions at school where teachers don't have the time for the individual kids that much, they learn to stop asking so many questions. And that's such a hard thing, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Personally,
curiosity
yeah.
is what drove us here. I mean, when we
Yeah.
were like 100,000 years ago around the fire, looking at the stars and wondering what are those, and then and we didn't had all the knowledge we have today, so we thought we didn't know were like just stars that were basically nuclear reaction happening. We have no idea, but we came up with explanation that made sense back then, and critical thinking is where we started like challenging those old concepts and coming up with new ones, etc. It's very important. Now I have another question. It's a little bit off script. Sorry, Angelika, but I heard some people thinking that because of AI, critical thinking is less important today. I think it's way more important because of AI. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I completely agree. It's way more than AI. I mean, I think of AI as like our brain almost 2.0. Like the brain has biases. Whatever we put into our long-term memory becomes our beliefs and experiences. With AI, whatever data and information we put in the training model comes back out to us. So it just looks like it's coming out of this big, very fancy black box that knows everything. So a lot of times we unfortunately just believe it's true, and it's not. And it's not just generative AI. It could also be the AI that does optimization and predictions. When it gives an answer, it's not a definitive answer. It's a probability. And so we don't think probabilistically. So we need to use critical thinking to say, okay, well, there's a 30% chance my sales are going to go up. There's a 10% chance they're going to go way down. And there's a 20% chance they're going to do nothing. Now, in the past, people would just say, oh, 30 is greater than 20 and 10. Let's go with that answer. But no, we need to think critically and say, okay, we have to determine what's going to happen. We have to put in fail-safes for all of those situations. So I think it's even more. And the analogy I use is the weather person. If the weather person says hey, today there's a 70% chance it's going to rain or not rain. And then you go out and you don't bring your umbrella and it rains. The weather person's not wrong. It was just 30% of those situations where the data was similar in the past history of capturing it. It didn't rain, and the other ones it did. So I think that requires not just continuing critical thinking, but it also requires more critical thinking than we did before, because we're also learning the nuances of the outputs of AI and being probabilistic and so forth. So the worst thing we can do is shut down curiosity with AI. I completely agree. That would be awful for society.
Yeah, and I think we should even be more curious in the things and critical and so on. So we covered. You talked about the 3 C's. We covered, I think, curiosity in this case. We have 2 more to go, right?
We do. Yes.
Let's go. The second one.
So which one do
I
you
know
want
what
to
it
do?
is.
Yeah.
That's up to you. It's your party today.
Well, I think the curiosity is one. So it depends on how people define this 3 C's. I also like talking about challenging, but I also like talking about communication as well. So I don't know which one we want to go down or similar, but I'm happy to talk about any of those.
Just go. Because I think both that you just mentioned are very important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Challenging your data, challenging assumptions is very, very important nowadays. And people simply sometimes do not know how.
Well, it's very similar to curiosity, whereas curiosity, your kids and your long-term memory is empty. So you ask why, because you're learning about the world. And then, as you said, Angelika, we kind of suppress that when we go to school and we go to our jobs. We don't really ask as much. Or the cultures don't let us, but we're challenging. And Igor, you mentioned it, like hundreds of thousands of years ago, looking up at the stars. We've evolved, right? The main things we worried about then was, how do I not get eaten by a dinosaur? How do I, have shelter, and how do I have food? And those things were true for probably hundreds of thousands of years. Technology has grown to the point that what was true a year ago might not be true today. What was true yesterday might not be today. So when we don't challenge what's happening in the brain, it's using all of our, what we call the mental models, all of our background, all of our beliefs, and then we end up doing the same thing every single time, not realizing that we're playing the game using the same rules, but the rules have changed. So I'm trying to think of a sports analogy, but imagine like you're playing football and then all of a sudden you're still trying to kick the ball in the net, but someone said, nope, we're not kicking the ball in the net anymore. We're kicking it up into a basket. Like, the rules change. And so when we don't challenge, what unfortunately happens is we make poor decisions, not because the data is wrong, not even because we don't understand the data, but it's because our mental model of what we're trying to look at has changed, the constraints, the boundary conditions, and we don't question those. So challenging is, what do I know to be true today? Is it still true today? What don't I know today, and where can I find that information? You can be curious, but if you're still not challenging the info you get, you only have half of the battle there. So they kind of work in tandem as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. And the other one?
Well, I say it's communication, because it's one thing. That's how we are as humans. That's how we've always shared stories through times, is by communicating them out and writing them or talking and so forth. And it's one thing to be able to read a novel or a book or a dashboard, but usually we are not the only people in our business or in our life or in the world that need to have an impact on a decision or a problem. So because we found out what we think the answer is to why our sales are declining, or how do we boost sales, or where should we market, we then need to share that with the stakeholders. And those stakeholders are the people that are impacted by it downstream or upstream. It's the customers, it's the people doing the work. And usually for them to be motivated to understand the change and why we're doing it, we have to show them some data. We have to show them some visualizations. And if we build the most convoluted visualization, they're going to be looking at it. And there's this concept called cognitive load. Their brains, like, you're going to start seeing steam coming out of their ears. They're not going to process it. And at best case, they just ignore it. Worst case, they misinterpret it, and they actually do the opposite of what you want. wants. So it's one thing to say, I know how to look at data. I know how to be curious. I know how to think critically and ask questions. I know how to challenge my assumptions. But then if you figure out the needle in the haystack and you can't communicate that to the stakeholders, as I said, best case, it's a missed opportunity. Worst case, it's actually misleading them and they do something wrong. So there's a whole art and science to the communicate.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Do you have something to add, Igor?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point that, and because of how our brain evolved in an environment, not today, but an environment where resources were very limited, the brain had to evolve in a way that it saves energy and it chooses what to process. So analogy that I do is like when you're reading a book, there's a really good book. You really like, let's say your data literacy in practice book. You really focus on, and people are talking to you and you don't listen. That information, that sound waves are being processed and it's being it reaches the brain. It's not that your ears are closed and your brain shuts down from that, but your brain decides to ignore that information because there's so much we can process. And it's already, the brain already consumes a lot of energy. And there's, like, of course, there's an average number, depends on person by person, depends on how, focused or you are. But on average, between 6 and 7 items is what you can pay attention on. So you don't want your dashboard to be like Times Square, too distracting, too noisy, because things will be ignored. And you don't know what things will be ignored. So you have no control what is being communicated. It's a mistake to think that people decide based on data, based on logical, based on it. We don't. We decide based on emotion. We decide based on things like that. So crafting the good communication through data help people to develop the critical thinking. And that's an exercise that it never ends. We always learning. It's different in each industry. It helps if you know the person, like your audience, but it's a constant learning, which is good because then it's not boring. It's always something new to learn. But keep in mind that, I have like this 20 information, I'll put it all here. No, you don't want to do that.
No, what I try to teach to my students, I do some courses now in prompt engineering at the big company that I'm working for now. And I always try to say to them, stop, think. And when you don't know how to answer questions, you can ask it also at generative AI, at Copilot in this case, or other models. But yeah, it's sometimes it's very difficult for people to find the needle in the haystack or the right information in that huge amount of debris that they get, because sometimes we see dashboards that are full with graphs that are most likely similar, right? But just display differently. And as Igor also says, sometimes it's better to deliver 3 graphs with the correct information than 25 graphs. So yeah, that's and just start, stop, think, and then do, and ask questions. So I think that's a good message. Yeah, me too. The second topic is about practical habits, Kevin. So what small daily practices can help people to strengthen their questioning skills when working with data or solutions or answers from generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about curiosity and challenging. So if you kind of put them together, a habit that I encourage everyone to do. And when I say this, I don't want people to even say, well, Kevin said I should spend 5 hours thinking about every, minor decision I make. But what I'd like people to question about is what other alternatives could be causing this, or what other alternatives do I have? So when we see a piece of data or information and we tell our brain that we have like a hypothesis, unconsciously, we're then looking at everything that proves it, and we're not trying to disprove, or we're not using the scientific method. So like a good habit is try practicing the scientific method. What I mean by that is when you see a visualization that leads you to believe a certain answer or situation, question and say, is there anything that disproves this? Is there anything that else could be explaining this? And if it's a situation where you're not looking at something, but you're trying to come up with like solutions or interventions or whatever, don't just pick one. Always pick at least two, because then you're looking at data for two and your brain's not trying to have confirmation bias and say, I just have one. So if people just take a little bit longer when they see the information, and I'm not saying, 5 hours to look at a very operational question, depends on how strategic and operational the decision is. But just saying, in what other situations could this have happened? What other data would I need to help me see if this is needed or not? Because everything that we're looking at from a data perspective, there's one thing that's always true. It's like in the US, we say there's like always death and taxes, and there's in data, it's always historical, right? If it's not a predictive data. So that means it was true yesterday, but we just said the world's changing. So maybe our sales figures are down yesterday or last month or wherever, but maybe we just launched something new and we don't have data on that yet. So always think about that level of uncertainty where we're looking at data that happened already. What does that mean for today or tomorrow? And just those little reframings of things, I think, help people instantly think critically. It's not giving them the answer, but it's giving them the tools to think more critically about what they're seeing. And again, the goal there is to not be misled by the data, not have bad decisions, not be misinformed. Not that people do intentionally. I'm not talking about disinformation where people intentionally put charts out there, but just regular charts that might say something. You could show that same chart to 10 people and they could potentially have 10 different conclusions based off of their experiences. So the habit is thinking about that and then getting diverse perspectives, asking other people, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I mean, it is a team sport.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example about the what you said the last, Kevin, about like the interpret charts, etc. This happened maybe considering the time we're recording. This happened maybe last week, maybe a week before, when OpenAI launched the new the GPT-5. One of the presentations they gave comparing the performance against a few benchmark tests. They were showing the graph comparing GPT, the GPT-5 with the previous model, I think O3 Mini something, and some other model, and they show like the performance of 75% of GPT-5. And then they show, by the way, they showed GPT-5, the two modes, with deep thinking, without it. They did a stack bar chart, which it's crazy because they use two different methods and they sum them up, which is mathematically it's just wrong. And then they did like two other bars comparing the other models. So the ChatGPT both combined 75%. The second bar, the previous model, was 69%. Not far, but the bar was so small and it was almost the same size as the third bar that was like 38%. So they made like two bars very close to one another, 38 to 69. And then the 75 was way above. So if you don't have critical thinking, you look at that and say, oh yeah, GPT-5 is way better. No, it's not. It's not. If you actually read what is the chart, if you think critically, they basically use the wrong scale on purpose to deceive people, which was like they removed the image like hours later when people, I mean, the audience is like a lot of people, data scientists, I mean, they know data. So it was like 5 minutes and people starting like pointing out like, why are you guys reporting like this? I even left a comment, oh, if you guys need better visualization tool, try Click. Anyway, that's one of the things. Another thing, when you think critically, it makes you helps you be a better citizen. So let me give you an example. That happened maybe 10 years ago in my home country, Brazil. There was a politician claiming, the politician was saying, oh, in my government, violence, homicides decrease by 50%. So there was two messages here. First was the definition of homicide. They actually changed the methodology, which was crazy. Second, what the message here is trying to give to the people is like, because of my government, violence decrease. But correlation is not causation. So if you have critical thinking, you might say, okay, what happened? Is that a trend that only started in his government or increased, or it is already happening before, which it was true, and what's going on, around other states, and then you started thinking critically, and then realize, oh, he's trying to deceive me. So it makes you like a better citizen. It makes you less deceivable. And so not only business, it's also in your personal life.
Yeah. So if we look at back at the question that I've added to an assessment with just a graph from a year report of that company. It's a line chart, but with flat lines and one red line, a little bit above. And I found 13 questions that I want to ask about this visualization. And then the other information, because the context is not clear as well, I developed almost 9 questions that I want to ask to the designer of this graph. What do you mean with this? What is the story that you want to tell here? And it's just one graph from a year official external year report. So it's and I think even when marketers or people make those type of reports, they should also be questioned. So there should be some kind of internal round of people being critical, being creative, do the community, the communication thing, challenge the things that they see. So yeah, I'm here with you, Kevin. We should do more, and even think of the alternatives. How could we have make this better? Or how can we make it better? To be honest. Okay. Let's talk about mindset shift. What mindset changes are the most important from somebody moving from being a passive consumer of data to an active critical thinking? So there needs to be a mind shift. What would that be?
We talked a little bit about it. I think the biggest thing we can say about that is they need to not just, we don't want them to say, oh, the dashboard said X, so it must be true. Mm-hmm. We talked about how visualizations can mislead. We talked about the difference between reading a book and really interpreting what the author means and how that relates to data. The analogy I tend to use is sometimes people use like the puzzle analogy. So imagine you have like 100-piece puzzle, and at certain point you're trying to put them together. Where that example falls for me is the puzzle is the puzzle. So if the puzzle is of like animals at the zoo, the puzzle is animals of the zoo. Like it's black and white. But I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. We have these things called rebus puzzles, REBUS. There was an old game show in the US that had these. They're basically symbols that build phrases, and you have to guess what the phrase is. So it adds that layer of abstraction. And so when you see those different phrases, the more and more pieces of the puzzle you put together, even when you have the whole puzzle together, you still have to interpret what the phrase means. And not the best example, but let's just say the phrase was the number 12. Now, I live in New England. I'm a sports fan. I'm going to say the jersey number of my favorite athlete. You live in somewhere else that's related to business. You're going to say, oh, that's the number of districts in our city. You're going to interpret it all differently. To me, the mind shift change is don't just look at the puzzle and assume it's true. And I don't want people to leave and say, well, I'm questioning if that's a zebra, because Kevin said question everything. Like, yes, sure, someone could have painted a horse black and white stripes, but use some critical thinking and say, what situation could this not be true? What context could I be missing? And I think it's important mindset, but it's also a tricky one because we're teaching people almost like not to believe everything. And I don't want people to think that people are out there lying to people. It's all the examples you both gave. Things can be misleading without being intentionally misleading. and our brains are visual. So when we see visuals, we kind of suspend everything else behind it. So first mind shift is, just because the dashboard says X, don't assume that that's true. Ask what else could have happened. Are we even asking the right question on the dashboard? Things like that.
Yeah. And a follow-up question is, because it starts with the mind shift, right? And with a mindset to do things differently, or to challenge the data or challenge the visual that you see, ask questions. And from there, we need to learn that it's a mind shift. And then we have to build confidence, right? We have to build confidence in the things that we do. So many people hesitate to challenge data or ask questions in meetings. So how can they build the confidence to start?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because that is something that I would say needs to be a partnership with you and the leaders of who you're asking the question. So going back to the school analogy, everyone asks why. At least where I'm from in the US, once you get to high school or like secondary school, when you ask why, the teacher thinks you're showing them up. And so you get put down. You're like, don't ask that. I'm the teacher. You go to your first job, and in your first job, what happens if the leader, the CEO, the director is presenting a chart and you ask a question? Usually what happens is they say, who are you? You're on day one. I've been here 50 years. And so there's a external cultural component. But again, going back to history, how did people learn way thousands of years ago? Is they had apprenticeships. They were given a coach, an apprentice, or whatever it's called, and they learned with them, and they were coached along the way, and they had a safe place to do that. We don't have that concept in business anymore. Business is moving too fast. So they say we support people learning, we support not failing, but falling and learning from it, but we don't have the practices in place to actually do that. We deliver training classes and they're lectures for 2 hours, or maybe we give them an exercise, but the exercise is theoretical, it's not practical. And then we don't have the coaches there to actually support them. So building confidence, yes, you need to learn your stuff, but the only way you're going to get confidence is if the outside world that you're working with is actually supporting that in a proper way. And we say we do that, but we don't in the business world. And that's a hard one, because it requires external change. We can do everything we want, but if our leaders are still saying we're data supportive, but we don't let people ask questions and we don't let people learn from mistakes, we fire them, you're not going to build the confidence.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think it has to start from the top down. It has to start in leadership. Some practical things you can do is like be the last to speak in meetings, because if you're the first to speak in the meetings and you are a leader, chances are people try to please you by agreeing with you. Actually, I'm kind of a weird person. I'm pleased when people disagree, because I like my ideas to be questioned, because I'm not attached to my ideas. I like them to be questioned, because if they're good ideas, they'll survive the questioning. But if they're not, I mean, I'm just eliminate them before like spending time or money on it. Or maybe, it's a combination of the two. So be the last to speak and encourage. I 100% agree. If you want the people to grow, you need to accept they will not do a perfect job the first, second, third, or fourth time, because we learn by making mistakes. I remember some like terrible mistakes I did in my career. Like once there was a big manufacturing company. I stopped. I was working in a taxing a project in Mexico. All of the plants stopped because of the calculation. Only the ones in Mexico were working, because basically the changes I made apply to the whole world. So basically applying Mexico taxes in plants in Japan, everywhere. So the whole plant stopped because the trucks could not leave. But my boss, we rolled back like in 30 minutes and everything was great. But my boss realized, okay, let's understand why it happened. Never happened again. But I learned if he fired me after, I was already like 2-3 years in the company, and actually I'm still in the same company today. all of the learning that took me the 3 years and the learning from the lessons, another company will benefit from it. Because when I was about to get really learn from my mistakes, I was just let go. And that sends a message to everybody else. Oh, we cannot make mistakes. We cannot fail, which is good, but we're not machines. What that makes is people don't risk. They don't innovate. They don't explore. They don't push the boundaries. So you basically, you're not evolving, you're not growing. Science is a great example. In order to get something meaningful in science, some theory that is tested and proved, you have like 100 others that don't, and that's how life works. That's a kid understand that if I jump here, I'll fall and I'll hurt myself by throwing objects and by understanding how gravity works, by experimenting. You can teach a kid, which I did with my youngest daughter. When she likes me to read for her to sleep, but she could not understand what I was reading, so I could read anything. So I was reading like Principia Mathematica from Newton, like anything. She did not learn the laws of gravity by me reading the laws of gravity to her. She learned by throwing objects and seeing, oh, this falls. All right. Oh, I can fall as well. Maybe not do that again. That's the same. So giving people the tools to build the confidence, it's allowing them to fail and then learning from the failures, and then they'll fail less and less and less, and then they will grow, and you benefit from the growth.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, of course, that what you hear a lot within businesses is that the time is not given, right? The time to learn is not given. Everybody needs to be chop, 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 chop. And from there, I think that's the wrong culture. That's the wrong culture, actually, to embrace new technologies, the new world of data and AI. So yeah, I think helping and developing a culture within an organization that actually is open and trustworthy, so that you have the ability to learn, those type of companies would absolutely benefit more, I think, than companies that do not do those kind of things. Yeah. Okay. Question. Another one. What kind of role models can inspire individuals to develop their critical thinking and questioning skills in data and AI-driven working?
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice follow-up to what Igor and you were both just saying, which, like, to me, what I try to do in a meeting, if I'm in we'll start, the system's broken. That's the problem. The organizational system is broken. So what I try to do if I'm in a leadership role in a meeting is, when someone presents something, I will ask a question, a polite question. I'll say, I don't fully understand that metric. Can you explain it to me? Because what I'm role modeling is that A, I don't know everything. B, I want to know more. And C, I'm okay showing that in front of other people. I'm role modeling what I want them to do, because the problem is the individuals don't do it because their leaders don't do it because of everything you said, the time, whatever. So if I can do that, if I can be kind of open and humble enough, but also fragile enough to say that. Now, the problem is I'm at that point in a position of leadership. So I can do that. I'm not going to get fired. The more you can do it, Igor, you said from the top and then go down, it creates that safe space. So I want role models that will ask questions and admit, I don't know everything. I would love role models that get diverse perspectives. So I'm a huge introvert, which you probably can't tell, when I talk. I don't speak usually unless I'm spoken to. So I need people to ask me questions, or I'm not going to just present. I'm not going to be the first one or the last one. I like Igor's point about going near the end to avoid the bias. I usually don't speak, and I feel like I have good things to say, and I've gotten better with that. But a role model would be inclusive. They would say, okay, we're talking about sales. So why is every single person in this room the same region, the same age group, the same gender in the same sales. Why don't we get the voice of a customer? Why don't we get the voice of marketing? Why don't we get the voice of R&D? So role models are ones that go outside of their zone and they bring in those diverse perspectives. So for me, diverse isn't just skin, race, color. It's diversity of thought. Who thinks differently than me?
Bridge.
Because they think
right?
differently. They're probably right more times than I am. I just don't have that perspective. The
Yep.
problem, like we said, is the system's broke, is we don't have role models that do that because they need to sign up. Eventually, we all have bosses, right? And so
Yep.
that's part of the problem. But organizations that do it, you both said it, they end up coming out in the long term 10x better and having much better people that are more equipped to go off and do great things, but don't want to leave because they're learning so much. I mean, that's the holy grail for a leader, is you build all these smart, intelligent workers, but then they love the culture so much and that they're learning that they don't want to leave. So
Exactly.
it's easier said than
Yeah.
done. I admit that. I'm glad you
I
didn't ask
know.
me how to do it, because that's harder, how to operationalize it. But I can explain what it is. It's just hard to put in practice because
Yeah.
it's broke.
Yeah, I know, and it's all about bridging. It's about bridging the gap, right? It's about bridging various people and bring them together across that bridge too. And that's why I'm a firm believer in talking the same language, right? Talking the same business language, so that everybody understands each other in that way. And that's a cool topic to
Exactly.
discuss also once time. So I remember you did some presentations about questioning, about critical thinking. Can you mention a situation where the lack of critical thinking led to wrong decisions?
Yeah, can I give a personal one, because it's funny. It's kind of
Okay,
funny. So
sure.
I have 4 kids, and my oldest kid was in school, and younger school, and so in U.S. like second grade, like 10 years old. Unfortunately, he has some mental health challenges, so he's having a lot of behavior. So we get a call, and they're like, "We got to come to school. Your son's like aggression, not so much discretion, to non-compliance, bolting, all those things. We're going to have to kick them out." And they showed me not a dashboard, but a chart. And it was a line chart, and the trend was going up. Totally accurate. Perfect. I read it. I understood it. So I wanted some more clarifying data. So real quickly, I just asked some questions. Can you get more data? Can you put a day on these? Can you put a time of day? Because if it's a Friday, maybe he's held it together for so long, and then Friday's tough. Or maybe it's a Monday, I did a bad job on the weekend, I let him do whatever, and then Monday's tough. Or if it's like right after lunch, it's because lunch is a free-for-all or recess. So I wanted more context. So I asked more questions. They're like, great. They go back. There's this thing called an ABC chart in that field. The B is the behavior, A is the antecedent, what was happening before that triggered the behavior, and the C is the consequence. I said, can you write all those things out? 2 weeks later, they call us back in, line chart's still going up, looking at the ABC, absolutely no, it looked random, right? It wasn't after lunch every day on a Monday or a Friday. They didn't stop and say, in what situation is all of this, could this be misleading? So I looked at the data, I saw what was happening, I turned to my wife, I remember vividly, and I just said, I got this. I said, okay, 95% of your consequences are you send them after the behavior to the principal's office. And they said, yep. I'm like, okay. Waiting for like the response or like the hammer to drop. And they're like, yeah, that's what we do when it's disciplinary. And then they said they don't usually like going there. I'm like, okay. If you knew a little bit about my son, he likes adults more than kids. There's a good chance he wanted the consequence. And they're like, no, not going to happen. So then we call him in, and I'm like, how was your day? He's like, Dad, it was great. I kicked Timmy. They sent me to Miss Johnson's room, the principal. She read to me for an hour. I think I'm going to try to punch someone tomorrow, maybe get 2 hours. All of their jaws dropped. Their faces turned red, tying it back to critical thinking. They didn't say in what situation is the consequence not a consequence. They assume because 90% of all kids don't like going to the principal, that, and I'm not saying that we don't use the 80-20 rule in life, but critical thinking says, okay, this isn't adding up. What is missing here? What situation? And most of the time, it's not the data, it's the assumption. So critical thinking is, in what situation is this not true? Now, I'm lucky enough that I know my son, obviously, unfortunately, better than the school. So I saw it instantly. They had the data. They didn't see it because they didn't think critically to just ask that question. Now, you could argue they didn't do it because they didn't have enough time and they have hundreds of kids and all these other valid points. But to me,
Nevertheless,
it's poor critical and it's my job, right? Because he's my kid. I have to advocate for my kid. They should, but sometimes they can't. But the point of the story is translate that to business or life. Most of the time, we're so busy. We look at the data. We might say, okay, the data might mean ABC, but we don't challenge or think critically about the problem statement, the question. We hear a lot about false positives and false negatives, like with COVID tests and other tests. The worst type of, there's actually a type 3, which is you did everything right, but you answered the wrong question. That's a type 3 problem. That's an example of not thinking critically. Just another quick example. A friend had like a Michelin star friend was opening a restaurant, and he hired a team to figure out what chef to do, to hire. And so the team went out, hired the chef, failed miserably, like horrible. They had to fire the chef right away. In the post-mortem, what had happened is even though he was a Michelin star chef, he was opening like a quick service fast food type restaurant. So the criteria for the chef was not like 5-star meals. It was almost like short order quick service. And if you're in a quick service restaurant, it takes you an hour to build a cheeseburger, you're not going to be profitable. So they didn't question the question. They hired the right chef for the wrong restaurant. Those are examples of poor critical thinking. And again, I want everyone listening to go back and think about when you just looked at the data, but you didn't question the environment and the boundaries. And if you have kids in school like my age, same thing, right? We do it all the time, and we're not making fun of the teachers, not making fun of the chef or the restaurant. There's no ill. It's the systems broke. That's why we have to pause and think. Is no one did it deliberately. No one should get shunned, or I was not mad at the teachers. Hopefully, it was a good teaching moment for them.
Yeah. Usually you need to understand it's root cause analysis. There are any exterior factors affecting this, etc. What I see a lot of times happening, and I think it's what happened in your kids' school, is that people, especially when they've done something, a lot, they think they know it all. They don't understand the exception exists. Rare events are rare, but they happen all the time. Like, it's very hard to win the lottery, but people win almost every week. So rare events, they happen. Exception happen. So people develop like we call the tunnel vision. You find police does a lot of innocent people go to jail because they found the suspect. They've stopped investigating. These are a suspect. They're trying to find proof. So you find something you believe in, this confirmation bias. We believe this kid has a behavioral problem. They stop questioning, okay, what's causing this? What's the environment involved? And they, I get my answer. I stop looking for. And in business, that's could be the end of a business.
exactly.
One quick thing on that, because that's all my second part of that point is, what do you do in place, right? Because then the teachers are like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, how? So you look at the data, and the antecedent was varied, right? The day of the week and the timestamp was varied. The behavior was varied between, like, they categorized into like 5 behaviors. The consequence, 95% of the time, was the same consequence. So to answer the question of what do you do differently if this happens to you in real life or in business, experiment, try a different consequence and see if you get a different result. So long story short, when this got resolved, the consequence was that he went to a room by himself. Literally within 2 days, the behaviors went down to nominal. Like, so the takeaway is, it happens. We get busy. We're fast, whatever. Look at the data. If you see something that you said tunnel vision, you see it in the data, change it up once and see what happens. If you can, if it's like a non-reversible decision, like we're going to send someone to Mars, let's try a different fuel. Probably not the smartest thing, but if you're talking about business decisions where you can revert quickly, that's the answer to think critically, is just try a different consequence.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked a lot about certain kind of assumptions, and we also talked about certain types of bias. can you help us in understanding, or our listeners understand, what assumptions do people often make about data that hinders their ability to think critically?
Yeah. So the one we just talked about is our assumption is we know the question that's being asked. We know why it's being asked. I think another one you had mentioned, correlation and causation. So because we see two things working together, we think that one's causing the other. And I'll add another layer of that is a lot of this goes back to evolution in the brain. So the brain, Igor mentioned nicely before, right? It doesn't take in all of that information. It kind of filters stuff out, and we don't know what it filters out. The other thing it does is it loves pattern matching and it loves storytelling. And if there's a gap in the pattern, what does it do? Is it tries to fill the gap. So I call that unscientifically the make sense mandate. If something makes sense, the brain doesn't question it. It moves on because it's got so busy. So let's say you have a dashboard or a line chart and it says, we added some more marketing and our sales went up. That makes sense, right? Because usually that's how it works. So we might not question it. But if I change the variables and use the same data and I give the analogy, hey, we sold more ice creams and shark attacks went up, the brain's like, well, wait, time out. That doesn't make sense. So when you do that study, everyone questions it, like, why would that happen? But when you do the same thing with sales and marketing, unless you know I'm questioning you about correlation and causation, we don't tend to question it. So the biggest assumption is that tunnel vision Igor mentioned, where we see the data and we don't think about, we're seeing two slices of the puzzle. What else could be causing it? So with the ice cream, it's weather, right? When it's hot, you eat more ice cream. When it's hot, you go in the ocean. That's what's driving it. So I think when we make assumptions about the problem statement, when we make assumptions about the question, like the short order cook versus the Michelin star chef, or what the consequences are. And I think when we make assumptions that the data that we're seeing is the only data that we have and there's no other data. So the sales and marketing are going up. We're assuming nothing else happened. We're assuming another competitor didn't go out of business. We're assuming we didn't do anything better to the product. Those are all assumptions that 90% of the challenges we're going to have in business is because of the assumption. It's not because of the data.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I have skipped some questions, Igor. Questions about the question. That's a good one, I think. What question about data literacy or critical thinking are you rarely asked but should be?
What question about data literacy am I rarely asked?
Or critical thinking you are rarely asked but should be?
I guess how do organizations get better at it? You asked it, right, about role models and stuff, but I think the thing about data literacy when you're in an organization is, I think of it as it's an individual skill, but in order to do well at it, you need the right culture. So think of like sports analogy. You could be the best footballer in the world at one thing, and if your team plays a different style, like if they play more defensive and you're offensive, and you're, if you watch Ted Lasso, is the guy that was trying to do everything himself, it's not going to work, right? So the question that I don't get asked enough is, how can we help the organizations empower better data literacy? How can I learn it differently? Because I think part of the challenge we mentioned is it's not sitting down and listening to a 1-hour lecture. It's immersing things
No,
like
it's various factors, right? If I look at the place that I'm in now and the things that I'm doing, it's on an organizational level to get that I don't know how to say that in English, but to get the organization upside down so they embrace a continuously learning organization, but also that the culture is about curiosity, about learning, about things. And then I have the individuals that want to learn something. So yeah, amazing things. But you need the two, right, to actually become somewhere. And the same counts for, it's not only for data, it's also from Gen AI. Critical thinking and questioning in that area is as well important. Yeah, and you can use the frameworks that you described in your book, Turning Data into Wisdom. The framework is as well in the book Data Literacy in Practice that you and I have written together. There are many articles about it. Data storytelling is a very important element as well, and Igor knows everything about that. So I think we have a good team aligned together to actually tell stories, right, Igor?
Yes, and I would like to add something, and then I'd like to add a final question. Also off script here. One thing that I like to add about like increasing the data literacy and critical thinking in companies. What from my experience, what usually works is there's no like formula, of course. It's case by case, culture by culture. But what usually works or helps a lot is to involve the people. If you're thinking about data culture as a top-down thing, leadership will demand, they will make you do this kind of training or take this kind of certification. It works up to a certain level. It works with people that were already interested in that topic, um, but it doesn't change the culture. But if you involve the people, like raising kids, and we're using a lot of like. I have 3 kids. I mean, it's like kids. Well, the oldest is 18 already, but anyway, still kids for me. But one thing that like helps, like raising kids, for example, if you demand, oh, I want you to, clean your room, they'll do it. Anybody have to ask every single time. However, if you do, okay, you responsible for this is your department, you're responsible for that. I'm not going to ask you, but that's your responsibility. You brought them to the mix. They are part of the conversation, so that actually improves the outcome. So bring people to the table, make them part of the discussion, part of the implementation, instead of just following orders. The whole process will get better. Now, final question: if you have to give one advice to people who wants to increase the critical thinking for themselves, for the company they work, one piece of advice, what would you give for all of us?
So I mean, I think it's questioning, but I'll be more specific. What I would encourage you to do is go back to decisions that you made in life, in business, whatever. Maybe you went on a vacation that ended up being less than ideal, or maybe you bought a car that worked out to be a great car. So good ones, bad ones, and then do like a postmortem. Think about, okay, what could I have asked when I was in the middle of this that I didn't know at the time that could have changed the decision for the better or the worse? So maybe it was a bad vacation. What could I have said? Okay, well, maybe check the weather, Kevin. Don't go to a jungle if you're trying to go, and not get rain or something like that. If you do that and start building that muscle and pattern, it's easier because you have a perfect use case because it's already happened. And you also know what the outcome is. That helps people with confidence because they know that, okay, in hindsight, if I did this, it would have gotten better. And the more and more you do that, the more muscle you build, the more you can do it for current decisions. So I guess it's a little bit of homework, but I encourage everyone to go back, look at a couple of decisions you made, do one in personal, one in business, and just ask a couple of questions. What could I have asked to have a different outcome? What data, if it existed, would have helped me come up with a different answer, whatever answer I wanted it to be? So ask about the data and ask about what questions you could have asked differently. I think that's going to go a mile.
Yeah, I think that's about reflection, right? It's reflecting based on the things that you've done, and I use that also in my trainings, right? When we look at or for my students, the STAR principle. It's about the situation, the task that you performed, the actions that you delivered, and then the reflection element. What could you have done differently to have a better outcome, or that it would have been a better process for you? So yeah, reflection is one of the most important things.
Just to
Igor.
add one thing onto
Yeah,
that
sorry.
real quick,
Yeah.
like from an to answer the question, but from an organization perspective, you hit the nail on the head. Is reflection is on the process, not just the outcome. In organizations, we look at the KPI and it was negative 10%. Oh, we failed. Okay, well, it might have been because something changed. So it's called double loop learning, and learning is don't just focus on the outcome, reflect on the process. You could have a
Yeah.
great process where the outcome was randomly bad, or just because the outcome was good, it could have been pure luck. So everything you said, but also don't just look at the result, look at the process you used.
Exactly. Yeah. Both ways. Igor.
So I think I will, my piece of advice, I agree with all what you said, but I think I'll add, think in a good way, as a little bit as a toddler. Ask why. My sales are down. Why? Don't assume it's like, oh, it's the sales department fault. They didn't do their work. No, why? And oh, my sales are up. Why? So ask why more often. So and then get to like the bottom of stuff. That's a important part of critical thinking. It's also a little bit of scientific thinking. It's not like question every single thing blindly, but understand the causes that drove that outcome.
Yeah. My pro tip would be, if you display a graph, any graph, in a report or in a presentation, please copy that graph, describe it a little bit in Copilot or in any other tool, and just ask for Socratic interviewing questions, or ask what could have the critical questions through your Gen AI solution. I think that helps a lot to become critical. And if you practice a lot with those things, you actually learn to do it yourself. So I don't think Gen AI makes us more dumb. It's a partner. It's co-intelligence that helps us to grow.
Yes. For everyone, as we've seen today, critical thinking is not just nice to have. It is the difference between blindly following numbers and truly understanding what they mean. We know data is the raw material. Data literacy is a great tool, but it's the ability to question, challenge assumption, and to avoid like the easy traps that makes data actionable and valuable. So I hope you all, I love this episode. I think it was very insightful. I hope you all liked it. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your insights, and to remind us that in this age of AI, we have almost endless data. Our thinking, not the technology, is what remains the most important skill we have. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. I had a blast.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
And Angelika, as always, thanks for traveling this crazy journey with me. And to our
But
listeners,
it works.
Yeah.
It works. Yeah.
Exactly. And to our listeners, keep asking better questions, keep challenging the obvious, and remember, data doesn't speak for itself; it speaks through us. So, folks, this has been another Data Voyagers podcast episode. So, thank you for being here with us and continue navigating the world of data. See you next time. Tchau, tchau, pessoal.
Bye.